And my mother was a warrior in my eyes because I don't think I could have fought it like she did. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the last 4 years were the toughest. We tried everything. And the fourth year before she passed, 4 years leading to that, we took her to a special school, university for a trial. And that was the day, I don't know what happened. And again, I don't blame doctors because they try and it's the disease's fault. But they think they might have changed her medicine drastically. And that night I had to rush over to her home at 4 a.m. and she had been moving her furniture out and she thought there were Nazis inside her home. And
Oh
that's
my
the night
God.
I take over her life because now I think, or that point, I think late onset dementia started and she was having delusions and hallucinations. So that was at times even more frightening than the Parkinson.
Hi, Envisionaires. Welcome to the Envisionaire podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives, ones filled with unlimited possibilities, by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, community, and love. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered to be medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice.
This podcast does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity.
We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liability that may arise from the information in this podcast.
The views explored in the podcast may not always be those of the host.
On today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the health pillar of the podcast, and we're going to be talking about Parkinson's, which is an illness that affects nearly 1 million people in the US and around 153,000 people in the UK, and 10 million people worldwide are estimated to have Parkinson's. In fact, according to Parkinson's UK, every hour, 2 more people are diagnosed with this illness. Given April is Parkinson's Awareness Month, I wanted to share this platform to help bring awareness of Parkinson's and invite on 2 guests on today's episode. The first is Dr. Becky Jones, who is the Research Communications Manager at Parkinson's UK. This is a charity that is driving pioneering research on Parkinson's and provides support for those diagnosed with Parkinson's and their families. Becky finished her PhD studies in biology in 2019 and has since then been working actively in science communications and science policy. In her current role, Becky writes news stories and blogs and explores Parkinson's research. And the second guest on the podcast is Dr. George Ackerman, who founded TogetherForSharon, a movement that he and his family created in loving memory of his mother, Sharon, who battled with Parkinson's for about 15 years before passing from the illness in January 2020. Dr. Becky will be speaking with us about what Parkinson's is, the known causes and symptoms, treatments available, and new scientific breakthroughs that give us hope that a cure is around the corner. George will be speaking with us about his own personal journey, caring for his mother, Sharon, who had Parkinson's, and how he found purpose through tragedy of losing her by founding TogetherForSharon. So a very warm welcome to Becky and George for being on the podcast to talk to us about this important issue during Parkinson's Awareness Month. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So Becky, as I was preparing this episode, I was reading about Parkinson's online generally, and also on the Parkinson's UK website. And I felt very almost like a slightly ignorant because I didn't realize that Parkinson's is a very diverse illness, and it can cover a range of conditions that share similar symptoms. Yet there are also, it seems like there are variables too when we're talking about this illness. So why don't we start with what Parkinson's is, and then also if you can touch on Parkinsonism, because that was a new concept that I actually learned about.
Yeah, sure. So Parkinson's is a condition that affects one particular area of the brain, the substantia nigra. And in the substantia nigra are the cells that produce a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for communicating messages about movement between your brain and the rest of the body. And in Parkinson's, we know that these dopamine producing cells start to die. They become damaged and start to die, and they can't be replaced. And it's this loss of dopamine that leads to the over 40 symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's. Like you say, though, it's not just a movement condition. Those 40 symptoms include things like problems with the gut, lack of sleep, loss of smell, all things that I didn't know could be linked to Parkinson's when I first joined the role. So there really is a diversity in not just in the symptoms, but also who the condition affects. I think we used to think of Parkinson's as maybe a condition that affects older people, men in particular, maybe with white backgrounds. But we know that Parkinson's could impact anyone. There isn't one day in the life of Parkinson's, and there isn't one face of Parkinson's. Young or old, male or female, any ethnic background can all be impacted by Parkinson's. And then Parkinsonisms are things that are similar to Parkinson's, but maybe don't look quite the same biologically. So one example of that might be that a drug-induced Parkinsonism is only there when somebody's taking the particular medication. And if they stop taking the medication, the symptoms go away. Whereas for people with Parkinson's, it's a more constant thing. And that loss of the loss of those dopamine producing cells in the brain, they can't be replaced, and it does progress over time.
Fascinating. Okay, so just so I understand this correctly, Parkinson's, I mean, the symptoms could be similar with Parkinson's and Parkinsonism, but essentially it's the lasting effects, if you will, or is the lasting effects of, for example, with the drug-induced Parkinsonism, that is a little bit more temporary and it can stop.
Yeah, so sometimes it depends on the Parkinsonism. So the drug-induced one is reversible, whereas Parkinson's isn't. But then there are other types like vascular Parkinsonism that has very similar symptoms, but doesn't. It is brought on by a stroke or some other kind of incident. So the onset of those damage to the dopamine cells is not the same. And there are also other similar conditions that aren't Parkinsonisms, but can often be diagnosed incorrectly as Parkinson's. One of them is called multiple system atrophy. And it's a real problem in general with Parkinson's that it's very hard to get a diagnosis of Parkinson's. We don't have any good tests to tell you for sure whether, like a blood test, for example, we don't have anything like that can easily diagnose Parkinson's. And that's why there is a bit of confusion in this kind of field of Parkinsonisms, where sometimes people are then getting the wrong treatment because it might look like one thing, but actually be another.
So, but then the commonality between all of the Parkinsonism is the lack of dopamine, or the damage to the the cells that produce dopamine. Is that right?
Yeah, so they're all movement disorders. So dopamine's involved one way or another, but it's not necessarily a given that all of those conditions can be treated by replacing dopamine in the way that Parkinson's is. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why that might be. I'm not sure if we know as a field. But diagnosis and getting a proper, accurate diagnosis is something that we're really passionate about at Parkinson's UK, and trying to champion more research into finding better tests and making sure people are seen quickly and accurately, because we know the stats are something like as many as a quarter of people with Parkinson's don't get their diagnosis right the first time.
Wow.
And we think that's way too many.
Absolutely. And does it matter if you do get the correct diagnosis early on? Can that affect the symptoms, or the onset of the illness, if it is in fact Parkinson's?
Yeah. So we don't have any treatments at the moment that can slow or stop progression of Parkinson's. What we can do is replace dopamine with medication, which can help control symptoms, which obviously then, if somebody's experiencing lots of symptoms and not getting any treatment for them at all, quality of life and experience of living with those symptoms can be really, really distressing.
Mm-hmm.
But also there is some more evidence that things like maybe modifying diet or particularly physical activity and exercise can be really useful and go a long way to slow progression of some of that cell death. So this is really exciting. Studies have shown that different types of exercise, depending on what you can do, 2.5 hours a week might be enough to kind of slow down some of the progression of those symptoms. So obviously, in that case, it's really important people are getting diagnosed accurately, getting the treatment and the care that they need, but also starting to implement maybe some of these lifestyle changes that could go on to help in the long run. And then in terms of research, Parkinson's is progressive, like I say, but also it can be quite hard to spot at the beginning. And by the time somebody's diagnosed, they've often already lost a lot of those dopamine producing cells, which means, and I've already said, they can't be replaced and we don't have any treatments to reverse that. So the earlier that we catch Parkinson, but the earlier that we spot symptoms of Parkinson's, the more we can understand those early stages of the condition. And better understanding will help us develop new treatments that could possibly slow and stop and certainly help treat people a bit sooner.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. What are the symptoms that people in themselves or a loved one, they can recognize and then hopefully bring that attention to a GP or specialist?
Yeah, really great question. Thanks for asking. Some of the symptoms that you might think of with Parkinson's are obviously movement related. So things like a tremor or freezing or uncontrolled movements. But something that I didn't know before I started working for Parkinson's UK is that some of the early signs could be problems with digestion and the gut. So constipation or reacting to certain foods. It also could be a lack of sleep or trouble when sleeping. In fact, there's a condition to do with sleep called REM behavior disorder, or IRBD. And as many as 70% of people who experience IRBD, which is like very disrupted sleep, acting out your nightmares, go on to develop Parkinson's. So that's a big clue.
Wow.
Another one is the loss of sense of smell. So there's some theories that say that while we know that Parkinson's impacts the dopamine producing cells of the brain, it might also affect other areas of the brain that could lead to some of those other symptoms. So things like, a change in your sense of smell, a change in sleep, freezing or stiffness in joints are all things that could be early signs of Parkinson's, as well as, of course, early signs of many other things, which is what makes it so tricky. But that's what we're here for, is to raise awareness and shout about the fact that it's not just a tremor, it's not just a movement disorder, and there's plenty more symptoms that could actually be a symptom of Parkinson's.
It must be, even though these symptoms, it's great that we have these, it must be kind of scary for someone if they develop a tremor. It's probably easier, I assume that it's probably easier to just ignore it or like kind of bury your head in the sand. So like, what would you advise to someone who's listening, who may experience something or knows a loved one they can say, oh, I've noticed that, or I've noticed that those symptoms with regards to movement.
Yeah.
What would you advise them?
There's a great section on our website called Worried That You Might Have Parkinson's. So our Parkinson's UK website, parkinsons.org.uk, has a section of information that talks you through some of the symptoms and what you should do, questions that you could ask, say, your GP or your doctor if you are concerned about some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. I think it is very easy to bury your head in the sand and feel a bit hopeless, especially because we know that there aren't currently any treatments that can stop that. We don't have a cure for Parkinson's. But what I would say is that I've had the absolute privilege of meeting some wonderful people in the Parkinson's community who've been diagnosed maybe 15, 20 years ago, who are living an incredibly active, fulfilling life, incredibly inspiring things, people who are jumping out of planes to raise money for Parkinson's UK. Somebody I know is doing a 150-mile trek in Nepal,
Wow.
10 years after being diagnosed with Parkinson's. So it's not a life sentence. It's just about getting the support that you need and getting the medical care and attention and holistic support that that somebody needs to live well with Parkinson's. But it is possible to do so. So I'd always say, if you have any concerns, speak to your healthcare professional.
Yeah, that's amazing. With regards to the lifestyle changes and that the sort of breakthroughs with regards to learning about how lifestyle may impact either, I guess, if you've been like diagnosed with it, it could help mitigate some of the symptoms, the progression in some ways, or maybe even preventative. Can we just talk about the modifying the diet is an interesting one. What has the science shown about that?
Yes, great question. So there's nothing 100% concrete. I can't sit here and tell you, if you eat this and if you do this, then you will not get Parkinson's. And if you do this, then you increase your risk. There's nothing that concrete. Mm-hmm. What we do know is a Mediterranean diet. There's been some research looking at Mediterranean diet for being able to slow progression of symptoms. And that looks quite promising, not just in Parkinson's, but in other neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and some dementia as well. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage, but then that's the same for a lot of health conditions, isn't it? In Mediterranean diet, lots of fruit and veg, balanced, healthy diet is great. One thing for people with Parkinson's is that sometimes the medication, the dopamine replacement medication, doesn't work as effectively if you're eating a high protein diet. And this is because in the gut, the receptors that take in protein are similar to those that take in the dopamine replacement therapy, which is then used in the rest of the body. So we recommend, or health researchers, healthcare professionals recommend reducing the amount of, say, red meats or high protein things while you're taking your medication. But there's no evidence that of one fits all diet. And what we're really lacking actually is information about non-Western diets and Parkinson's. There's really not very much information about that at all. It would be great to see more research in this area because we know a lot of research is kind of European centric, and it would be great to see a bit more about how other diets might impact the condition.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, because obviously with the revelations from the blue zones, and like everyone's talking about the blue zones and these like areas where people are living to 100, and not only are they living to 100, but they're actually having these brilliantly active, fulfilling lives. And it's really interesting to try and understand that. That's fascinating. Like, what are the Japanese doing and how are, and are they suffering with these sorts of, and obviously not only Japanese, but like many, many zones around the world. But yeah, it's really, really cool. That's really interesting. And so, right. So I think like with regards to all the science, it feels like, is there any other breakthroughs that you want to share? I really like the idea of the modification of lifestyle, but is there anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, there's some great things coming up. One area that's particularly exciting to me is this idea of repurposing drugs that already exist. So using a drug that is already used, we know it's safe, people are taking it. but repurposing it to be used for people with Parkinson's in a slightly different context. One example of this is a component of a cough medicine called ambroxol, which there's some evidence to show that it could to slow or definitely slow progression of Parkinson's for some people in the early clinical trials. So last year we announced that we'd be funding the phase 3 in partnership with Cure Parkinson's and some other Parkinson's charities. That we'd be funding a phase 3 trial of this. And a phase 3 trial is one of the final steps that any drug needs to go through before it's approved for use.
Wow.
So that repurposing is really exciting. There's loads of different studies going on looking at repurposing drugs. And it's great because it means we can move a bit faster. We already have that safety data. We don't have to go back to the start and check everything again. So that is really exciting. Yeah. And there's also lots of stem cell research going on, which is again is exciting because while we're looking for things that can slow progression, we can't at the moment bring those cells back once they're dead. There's no way of replacing them. But stem cells might offer that opportunity. So
wow.
Reprogramming stem cells to become dopamine replacement cells, maybe we could even reverse some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. But that's a long way off, but something we're really excited about.
I just had another question that came into my head. We're talking about this dopamine, and I know you said about, like, again, the lifestyle movement is, I've been also reading that movement is so important because and I wonder, is it because of the dopamine release that you get with movement and or exercise?
Yeah, we don't really know. We know it's good. That dopamine release through exercise, through volunteering, through any kind of movement, being outside. There was a study quite recently looking at kind of well-being and the benefits of mental health, not just that it's nice to be outside, but maybe there is a more kind of chemical change in the brain that might be beneficial for Parkinson's. It's likely that it's more than just that because of the effects that we're seeing, that it is kind of slowing down progression for people. But it's really interesting. And I think that there's a lot of research looking at exactly why exercise might be so good or movement might be so good for people with Parkinson's. But until we know for sure, we keep encouraging and keep taking part. Anything that is of interest to you, anything from table tennis to, I know there's like Samba, there are dance ballet classes. All of these things are being studied in research studies to try and work out why this form of exercise might be helpful. But yeah,
I love it.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, it does. It sounds very exciting. So now, if there's listeners who want to help and they want to get involved, what we talked about this before, but I understand that donating time and or funds, like you guys, you're very open to any sort of donation of sorts. So can you tell the listeners how they can help?
Yeah, so Parkinson's UK, we're a research and support charity, but we rely entirely on donations. We're incredibly fortunate to have wonderful supporters up and down the country who give up their time, give their voice, lend their voice to political campaigns, and financially contribute, do crazy fundraising things like jumping out of planes. But the support means that we're able to fund research, which is going to bring us closer. And I would say, speaking with my research communications hat on, one of the best things that people can do is to explore taking part in research. And it doesn't have to be taking part in a new drug. It could be attending a ballet lesson to look at the effect of movement on Parkinson's. It could be having a chat with a researcher over the phone to share your valuable experience, whether you live with Parkinson's, maybe you care for somebody who does. There's loads of ways that you can get involved, and often from home. You might not even need to go to a study site. It's really important, and I really can't stress enough how we won't everything we know so far is because of either people generously donating financially or donating their time to research projects. Because without people taking part in research, we simply won't be able to find new treatments and be able to improve quality of life for people living with Parkinson's today and in the future.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Becky. Now, before we go on to George, we have the Envisionaire questionnaire, which we ask all of our guests. And it's a fun feature of the podcast where we look and reflect on the past, present, and future. So it's 3 questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So looking back towards your past, if you could give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be?
I think it would be to not worry so much about choosing the right path at age 15. I think my personal and professional career has sort of zigzagged one way or another. And I remember feeling at 15, like what decision you made then would set you on one path for life. Yeah. So I think, go with the flow a bit and don't worry so much about the small stuff.
I have this funny theory in my mind that we have like various paths that we can take in life, but at the end of the day, we all kind of get to the same place we're supposed to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I love that.
Yeah, so I get that. Okay, reflecting in the present moment, if you could have dinner with one person tonight, who would it be and why?
Oh my goodness, that's such a hard question. I don't know, and your mind just goes blank.
It could be someone like you are inspired by. It could be someone who in your family. It could be like it's just like, who would you like to have dinner with? Mine it kind of goes between Oprah and Obama. Like like it just goes back and forth. Oh, Michelle Obama gets in the mix sometimes as well.
Michelle Obama was who came to my mind actually. Yeah. I think I bet you get that answer a lot, but I read her autobiography while I was finishing my PhD, and traveling to and fro on the train, listening to her experiences of growing up in Chicago. And there was something she said about people who either get to a position of power and pull up the ladder from behind them, or people who get to a position of power and then do everything they can to bring everyone else up with them. That's really stuck with me. And I think the work that she's doing in terms of providing education for girls across the world, making sure girls feel empowered, I'd love to hear more about her motivations and where she sees the future for that.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And then looking towards your future, what's one goal you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years?
I would love to see a new treatment for Parkinson's in the next 5 years, a new approved treatment that ideally would slow or stop progression, but even anything that would provide some impact and change lives for people living with the condition. I've had the absolute privilege of meeting so many people with Parkinson's up and down the country, making friends, chatting with people who are truly, truly inspiring and change the way I look at the world. And if I could have some tiny part in that through encouraging people to take part in research, become more aware of the condition, I think that would feel incredible.
Love that. Amazing. Well, let's hope we're praying for that, and we're sending you guys, lots of love and hope that happens. So, well, thank you so much, Becky, for being on the Envisionaire podcast. If people want to learn more and get involved, which is it the Parkinson's UK website? What's the best way?
Yeah, the Parkinson's UK website is the best place to go. We also have a helpline if people aren't online to contact 0808 800 0303. And we have trained advisors there on the helpline ready to offer information, advice, support, and direct you to one of the team who can answer specific questions.
Thanks again, Becky. Now let's move on to George. Well, George, firstly, I obviously want to say that I'm very sorry about the passing of your mother, Sharon. My father passed away in 2021, and I know that the loss of a parent is always felt. So again, my sincerest condolences, and I'm really sorry about your loss. And I really want to also thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast to share yours and your family's story with Parkinson's and to bring more awareness to the illness that affects millions around the world. So thank you again. I know that Together with Sharon is a movement that came out of the tragic loss of your mother, Sharon Ackerman. So I'd love for you to share with the listeners a bit about who Sharon was as a mother, a sister, and a grandmother.
First, I want to say sorry about your loss. We send our love and support to you and
Thank you.
anyone having to go through losses. I mean, I'm still grieving 4 years later, and this helps me a lot. So I'm also grateful for your time, your show, and your audience, because it means the world to me and my family. Unfortunately, my mother passed on 1/1/2020 due to Parkinson's disease, and I was kind of thrown into the world of caregiving. Didn't sign up for it. Didn't ever dream that we would go through that, or my mother would ever have to also fight this battle. She was an incredible person. She was loving. I always say I'm only the man I am today because of her sacrifices. So I knew when it was time that I had to sacrifice anything I could to be by her side and just comfort her through the tougher times. She was an incredible mother because she was very selfless. She had a master's degree and she was a school teacher and literally gave it all up to raise me and my brother. And she was a single mother and just, always instilled in me caring for others, even if it's in, some of my fields. I've been an attorney, police officer, reserve now, and a PhD in education field in criminal justice. But I've always, given a lot so I can see other people flourish and excel in their lives. And I love to learn from others. I don't care how many degrees someone has, at least myself. I still learn every day from everyone I meet. But I think the most important thing is that, unfortunately, she was my best friend. So part of when she passed, a part of me also, I feel, was gone forever. And that's what I started TogetherForSharon.com in her memory. And I thought there'd be like 3 people see it, and that would be fine with it. But we've had over 35,000 people. If you look on the site, it has a little secret counter there. And I'm just amazed how it's grown. And part of me is actually not happy because I think part of it is that this is the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease in the world, not just in the US. And I think my efforts are being seen more because so many are now getting Parkinson's, or the family, or the mailman, or the truck driver next door. So it's just kind of something I do want to end. And I don't want to have to be on, millions of shows and things and talk. I wouldn't mind just to remember my mother, but this is such an urgent message that we need to end Parkinson's so no one else ever has to go through what our family has.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And well, there's a lot of things obviously I want to talk about today with you, but as a mother, let's say as her as an individual, you mentioned she's a teacher. And so obviously education is something she imparted on you, given your vast array of degrees and pursuit for education. So that's a beautiful legacy she's left within you and your family. I listened to your podcast. You have a podcast called Together for Sharon. And actually your first episode, you had your lovely wife as your guest. And I actually listened to that and I thought it was so beautiful the way you guys remembered your mother. And actually, I feel like I got to know her in that way as well. And so she seemed to be so thoughtful, loving, and kind, obviously, not only to you, but also your kids. You have 3 kids, so her grandkids, and also your wife, who talked about her in a sense as like a mother figure, a mentor as well. And so can you share a bit about her as a grandmother and also how she was with your wife?
I mean, I feel like you are already family. And like I said earlier, this is not about just a quick podcast or talk. This has to be a conversation that continues on beyond this. So everyone listening, please share this. Please support the show. My journey, again, I thought only a few people would see it, but for some reason now we almost have our own TV station and radio station. And we're not an organization. We're not a foundation. I'm a lawyer. I could do it, but I don't want to because I'm just one son. and one website, literally, that we don't accept money. And I just wanted my mother to be remembered. We started the Together for Sharon podcast thinking just because I wanted to concentrate and give more highlighting to people who have Parkinson's, caregivers, and in memory of those loved ones who passed due to Parkinson's, unfortunately, who I personally feel are sometimes still forgotten. So we started that. Unfortunately, my wife, like you said, we have 3 children, not unfortunately, but fortunately, but she doesn't have as much time and she loves helping, but she does a lot more background. So that's once a month. And then I started Q&A with Sharon's son, George, which I do alone. And I've been able to knock out a lot of them. Like I had an honor to meet or have United States Senator Rick Scott on a week ago. I've had the policy chief of policy or executive director Ted Thompson from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. We've had some expert doctors like Ray Dorsey and Dr. Oken, who are renowned for They wrote the book Ending Parkinson's Disease. So it's definitely incredible to be able to speak to people, but I really do it again because I want others to realize what they're doing. So all my work is really just to kind of showcase other people. And we do have, like donation things on the website, and there are links to organizations like Drive Toward a Cure and Power Over Parkinson's and the Michael J. Fox Foundation, but they're actually made by those organizations and they're in memory of my mother. So it's pretty amazing technology where if you donate, it doesn't go to us, it goes to them. So, I have to explain that sometimes because I do want everyone to know we're not looking for, anything in return. I just do this because I just, again, miss my mother, but wouldn't want anyone to have to go through what we have. But back, the nice thing is I finally published a book on Parkinson's awareness. My first book in this area. I've written books in other areas like the law. And a few chapters are literally all about my wife and my children. They were my support during all this. I don't think if it wasn't for them, even today, I don't think I'd be able to do any of this. So that is very important. We never have the time to go more in depth, but if the readers, or listeners do want to see, this is the book that just came out. And, it means a lot. I actually kept a journal the last year of my mother's life, and it takes you through the good, the bad, and the ugly, literal timestamps and the dates of what happened and how it was a struggle for us and everything I tried. We just kind of felt like I failed. But I do have some light at the end of the tunnel. So out of the bad comes a lot of great things like meeting inspiring people like you and so many that are still out there fighting. So again, that's kind of the quick version. But, without my mother were best friends too. So that meant the world to me. And the picture of our book is actually me dancing with my mother at our wedding. And that was my favorite days ever because I got to be with my wife officially, make it official. And then also my mother and I had the mother dance. And that moment, kind of frozen time. If you watch the movies, that moment, because Parkinson's at that minute didn't matter. And, we forgot it and we just smiled, laughed and talked. And it's hard to even talk about some days, but that's, I'm 200 pounds, 6'2", and policing, and I fall apart talking about my mother because I believe, she is not. It's irreplaceable. The son and I'm sure the daughter too, but the relationship.
100%. Oh, that's such a beautiful. I mean, I didn't know that was from your wedding. I actually had seen that photo on your website, and I wondered, I wonder where that is. But yeah, makes sense from your wedding.
Yeah, we don't dress up like that just for any day.
It's not a Saturday night, a casual Saturday night. And so I heard a story that you and your wife shared about your mother, which was that you were sitting and having Chinese food at a restaurant. Was that one of the first times you'd met or they'd met or something? Tell us a bit about that. That was a beautiful story.
It's actually, it's full thing in the book, ironically, but I met a lot of people in my lifetime. Just did it click and met my wife. Fell in love instantly and didn't think she was as into it as like the movies say, not that into it, but she was, thankfully. And she jokes and says it was my resume and my red hair, which I have like an 80-page resume. So anyway, I dated her a little bit, like a month or two, and then I decided let's just meet. My mother had this little rinky-dink old. It's now closed down. Bad, just like really a gross type of old Chinese place, which might have been condemned if they did all this. But we loved it. The food, I loved it, and me and my mother would go there alone a lot. And it was across from her home, so we took my wife there for her first kind of date to everybody to get to know each other. And I was, scared or worried. I hope they like each other because this could be forever. And they forgot I was even there. They just like kind of
Ah,
they just started talking. They loved each other, and the rest was history. And it's kind of tough because my
mm,
mother loved my wife. My wife did some incredible things, but my mother was extremely sick and couldn't really leave the house anymore. And she just, Parkinson takes away a lot. It's a neurodegenerative disease, the fastest growing, unfortunately, in the world. And it just kind of affected her left arm. So for several years, she just couldn't use her left arm, but she still could be independent. But as it progressed, she started having dystonia, like curling of the toes, not bad external tremors, but she had internal. Her stomach was being destroyed from all the medicine. And then the last year again, which was the toughest, it was like a decline. She was very healthy, and her weight started going so thin. She was almost like a piece of paper, so fragile. And but I remember towards the very end, even on tough days, like her hair was not good, and she wasn't happy about how she looked. I didn't care about any of that because it was my mother. But my wife would bring in like a pedicure person, a manicure for her hair,
mm,
and she just wanted her to feel, like a real person because Parkinson doesn't define you. And, I don't believe it might take someone and, kind of change them and hurt them in a way, but you can still fight back as long as you can. And my mother was a warrior in my eyes because I don't think I could have fought it like she did. And
yeah.
unfortunately, the last 4 years were the toughest. We tried everything. And the fourth year before she passed, 4 years leading to that, we took her to a special school, university for a trial. And that was the day, I don't know what happened. And again, I don't blame doctors because they try and it's the disease's fault, but they think they might have changed her medicine drastically. And that night I had to rush over to her home at 4 a.m. and she had been moving her furniture out and she thought there were Nazis inside her home. And
Oh
that's
my
the night
gosh.
take over her life because now I think, or at that point, I think late onset dementia started and she was having delusions and hallucinations. So that was at times even more frightening than the Parkinson's.
Yeah, of course. Oh my gosh. That's frightening. Um, well, I think I wanted to ask about that is when did you actually take on the primary caregiver role? And it sounds like it was 4 years before she passed. Is that right?
Yeah, I knew the word Parkinson, but I blame myself in a way. I wasn't aware of what it was. I mean, she said she had it, but she never talked about it. She didn't want to burden the family, so she kind of kept it quiet, almost like a secret. I don't know if it would have made a difference. Today we have a lot more where we can slow the progression, which is great. It won't stop the disease, but things like exercise, diet, a lot of environment. I think my mother got it, and I'm not a scientist, but through the environment. She had a nice home for 20 years, but it had, mold and termites and who knows what the people sprayed back then. They're probably still doing it today. And, again, she had no other issues ever her whole life. So she went the last 4 years from walking a few miles to cane for 2 years, then a walker for a year, and then, wheelchair and then bed bound. So it was just something, again, you don't imagine. And she was only 69. She was very young.
Yeah.
We bought her a brand new home where she picked everything. And I remember the picture of us walking in. She was so excited. She never even got to really enjoy it. It had a little man-made lake. I thought she'd be able to spend 10 years out there with her grandkids and blowing bubbles in the Sundays. And she never really got that opportunity, unfortunately.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's horrible. And so, okay, so when you stepped into the caretaker role, was that a natural step for you? Because I know you also have a brother, right? And so, sometimes with siblings, there's like, so was that something that you just naturally felt compelled to do? I know you mentioned that she had sacrificed so much for you. So you felt it was very natural for you to want to sacrifice when she got
Um,
ill.
Almost like when you become a lawyer or police officer, even a professor, you don't, you might learn book things, but you don't really know what you're doing when you get in there. So
Mm,
I just knew I had to help her. She was single. She swore to me she didn't want to be in a home. So that was not even an option. And my brother unfortunately wasn't able to help like I was. I'm more of the older one, and I'm a lawyer, and she was very easy to help though, because she helped me. I was her power of attorney. We took care of her will early. We took care of even sadly the funeral stuff, but we were told by every doctor you don't die from Parkinson's, you die with it. So we had no plan that we were going to lose my mother. We thought maybe by, 10 more years or 20, but she'd suffer. So I don't even know if that would have been good either. So, I don't have any, again, experience of caregiving or anything. And I just was thrown into it, and I accepted the challenge. And, it was tough though, because she would ask me what's next, or will she be there for my daughter's wedding? I never lied to her, and I never told her the wrong thing, but it was hard because I like to have answers to things. And, I didn't have any answers. Even to this day, we don't understand, what really did end up happening.
Mm-hmm. And how did you deal with the challenges of being a primary caretaker? Because I know that you have a wife and you have 3 children, and you were working in like law enforcement and so on. So how did you deal with the challenges? What was why don't you share what the biggest challenge was, and then how you overcame it?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is the book helps me explain that a lot better than us, because I don't have as much time, but it really dives deep into it. I mean, I felt anguish, sadness, anxiety, stress, depression, everything. I felt like I was going to quit one day, but, I had to keep, it's like you have a good and bad guy on your shoulders, or a girl, and you're just telling them to, one saying to give up and go put her in a home, the other one saying no. We spent $12,000 a month to hire companies. Like, we went through 7 or 8, because none of them, they were just women who they'd send. And my only goal was that she wouldn't fall. Like, I didn't care, because they didn't even know what Parkinson's was, half the people. And that was frustrating. And my mother's hallucinations and delusions also didn't help, because she thought they were harming her. So I had to put video cameras in. And it was just, it felt like a nail, nail, and then a hammer just hitting me on the head. Every time I tried something, it would just go back down. So, I mean, the main tip I tell everyone is you have to take care of your own health. I didn't do that, but I can't tell everyone what to do. They have to decide for themselves, but at least the best advice is, eat healthy, exercise, and take care of yourself first, or you won't be a great help to your loved one. Unfortunately, my mother, again, we didn't know she was going to pass at all. Like, we were never told. It's not like some other diseases where, if you don't do so. I'm not an expert at, cancer, but chemo could possibly help, but the Parkinson doesn't have that. So, we tried medicine things, and it didn't really do that, slow the progression. So it was really a lot more spontaneous acts and just on the fly, which isn't the best. But, we tried everything from chiropractors to needles in her spine back, because she had fibromyalgia, which is not, again, death sentence, but it is tough. And then even medical marijuana, which is another comedy show, because I'm a cop, and I didn't want to do that, because it's legal if you have a license, which we did. But going into the store the first time was like Mission Impossible music. I'm going to be on video, and I don't want to be, even though it's all legal. But it didn't help, because it was like the Wild Wild West. Like, the distillery doesn't speak to the doctor, so it was chaos. So unfortunately, I just wanted that, because I didn't want her in pain, because she was in a lot of pain. So, it just didn't, nothing seemed to work. But all these sad things, there is positive at the end of the tunnel. And I want listeners to know that, I'm still here. I'm still fighting for everyone else. And although, I miss my mother, I do make sure that everything I do is in her memory, whether I'm on every social media posting. And, I'm hoping that just her journey is never forgotten, because, I hate this disease. I don't hate a lot of things, but I will never let Parkinson it took my mother, but it won't take her memory ever, as long as I have anything.
Yeah, 100%. How did the movement of Together for Sharon start? I know that you said she passed on the 1st of January 2020, but within what period of time did you just say, I feel compelled to do something, and I'm going to do this with my family? How did it start, and how has it evolved?
This has been an incredible journey. I mean, the way it started was my mother, again, unfortunately passed, like, out of nowhere. Like, I was so in shock. I felt like sick, literally. And I just didn't know what to do. We were going to have the funeral, thought a few people again would show, and that would be that. But so we were the kind of people like to give people some little teeny thing, to remember her. So we made these little bands, and I don't know if you can see, but just as Together for
Yeah.
Sharon. And it's that was my wife's idea actually, and the website wasn't on there. These are like this. It's funny if you look at like Nintendo when it was first started at the box. It looks funny now. Today it's what it is. But anyway, and it says the memory of Sharon Ackerman for Parkinson's awareness. So I bought these, just 10 of them or 20 and 60 people showed at the funeral. It was beautiful. Like everybody was there. I gave a speech, which I'll never. I speak a lot, but that was the hardest. It's online. It's the hardest speech I've ever given in my life. I don't even know how I made through it. But anyway, so as we left, now he's my brother-in-law, but his name's Austin. He's amazing support too. It's my sister-in-law's husband now. But he put the band on, and he put his hand up, right, and he wasn't in the picture. And it was just his hand with the band, and he just sent it to me. And I looked at it and said, "Oh, that's really nice." And then something just hit me like a boop, if you're in a cartoon, like a cloud smoke came up and said,
Yeah.
"Why don't I wear it and take my face out of it but put it everywhere I go?" And I said, "That's a great idea because," and I'm talking to myself at that point, but I said it's a great idea because as a lawyer and cop, nobody really wants a face on social media all the time. It's like, but they didn't mind, putting their arm like this. So somehow it went viral. We had even famous people, like I don't know if you know Willie Geist from NBC, like in one of the hosts of the actual like NBC nightly show. His wife, Christina, actually put it on, was talking about it. And from that
Wow.
point on, all over, we spent like everything was free. So I paid about like a few $1,000s to mail them to people. And then
Wow.
all of a sudden, everybody around the U.S. and beyond were now wearing the band. And we had Disney World in the background, basketball, NBA courts, and football stadiums. And it was just a cool thing. I had to kind of stop because it was, we don't accept money. So I was paying it was a lot. So now when we
Yeah.
do sing this weekend, I'm actually at the American Parkinson's Disease Symposium. We have a little table. I have a thing in memory of my mother, and we pass the bands out for free. And I just do
Beautiful.
they're expensive to do too, but I do them so people know that they're never alone. And it's incredible to do virtual things because I reach individuals that are amazing like you. And when you're in live with people with Parkinson, they come up and they first they come up to me and they think I'm selling something, which is it's tough. But then when their eyes turn and see what my journey and my mother, they hug me and they cry, and we all like so because they know they're not alone. Because most people do feel alone, but when they see people like us still out there, that's why I keep doing it. And sadly, again, I'm not following my own rules. Take care of yourself first, because some days, I really wanted to meet with you today, so I made it no matter what. But I have other shows, and we actually started a support group of people. It's a long story, but I don't have Parkinson's, and I'm no longer a caregiver of someone living with it. And I've had some unfortunate situations, and maybe it's just me, but that I feel like I'm not part of the community still, which is really sad. And I feel like a lot of the time, obviously they don't want to hear a lot of the sad stories, but I can talk to them about only the positive stuff. But a lot of time I can't go to meetings or support groups for people with Parkinson's because I don't have it, yet or even ever. And I can't go to support groups for people with caregiving currently because they don't. Again, I'm just a different category, and that's what my next book in the future will be about. Is how it's going to be called A Seat at the Table. And unfortunately, it has two meanings. One is we no longer have my mother to have a seat at our table because of Parkinson's, and also at some point, I'm not saying everyone, but I do feel like some organizations and things that I don't have a seat at the table. And I disagree. I feel my mother still has a voice and we still matter. And I really want to. The first book was dedicated in memory of my mother, but to everyone diagnosed and their families now. The next book will be fully dedicated to all the millions. And I'm not talking about, I'm talking about decades, millions and millions of people who lost a loved one due to Parkinson's, and all the caregivers still alive today that want their loved one to be remembered. And we have a new section on Together for Sharon called In Memory, where I'm just covering stories of loved ones, and it's free. Everything's free. So.
Beautiful. So as we wrap up, one of the questions that I had is, if we have a listener that is listening, either they're facing a diagnosis of Parkinson's themselves, or they have a loved one who has that diagnosis, what advice would you give them? I know you mentioned self-care. Is there anything else that you would advise them?
Yeah, I have a little message I say for everyone. I feel like we planned this, but we didn't. But this is for you and the audience. We love you, we support you, we care a lot about you, and you're never alone. I will advocate, along with you, of course, for Together, because I feel together our voices are so much stronger. And I always say I'm just getting started, even though I'm not. I say that because every time I meet someone like you or someone out there, with Parkinson's or family members or someone who lost one, a loved one due to Parkinson's. It really re-inspires me each and every day. I had the opportunity again 2 years ago. My mother passed 4 years, but I didn't even think of anything but me and my mother because I was still grieving. But I realized a year ago that it wasn't just about our journey; it was about everybody, and we're a family in this fight. So I had the honor to speak and interview 600 people around the world, from France, Italy, Spain, England, Australia, Nova Scotia. I mean, I was shocked to find out even in Iceland, Parkinson's doesn't discriminate. It goes everywhere. So I interviewed 600 people. It's on the website for free. And it just helps people because they realize they are never alone. And every morning a new one shows up because I've done so many. And it just, I don't remember maybe because it's a lot. And then it just kind of re-inspires me again. And the only journey that breaks my heart is the one I'm not aware of. So we still have a lot more work to do, and we have to end Parkinson's disease. And there's actually last thing is for the for the first time in history, we've had nothing, sadly, in the United States for legislation to end Parkinson's. And last December was the first bill in history that passed the Senate, the House, and now it's going to the Senate. We're not sure when. It's called the National Plan to End Parkinson's Disease, and it's the first bill in history. And you and your viewers, if you're in the US, can actually reach out to your senators and ask them to support the bill. Once it passes, it'll change the world for people diagnosed, for caregivers, for research, and hopefully to find a cure. So there's a lot
Wow.
of positives again happening, and you can actually be part of history, which if we meet up in a few years, I might not be able to say that. I hope, because hopefully it'll pass. But this is like very important. I worked with the Michael J. Fox Foundation on my representative to had them support it. Both of my senators in Florida are supporting it. I just interviewed U.S. Senator Rick Scott a week ago on the bill. That'll be out in a week or two, I hope. So there's a lot of good coming from the bad part. Obviously, I can't change what happened with my mother, my family, but we can end Parkinson's and change it for everybody else. So again, I'm just grateful for your time, your audience, and this again isn't the end. I hope it's just a conversation that has to keep continuing till we end this disease forever.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you, George. So now we're just moving on to the Envisionaire questionnaire, which is the fun feature of the podcast. We ask guests to reflect on their
Having fun
past.
the whole time.
Oh, good, good. Well, I'm glad. So we ask guests to reflect on their past, present, and future. And so, looking back towards your past, if you could give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be and why?
Let's see. I mean, the one thing I've always been brought up and believe is never have any regrets. And I don't think I could have done anything different or better. If I had more time, I think honestly, now we're in technology world, I would have started my own podcast show with my mother before Parkinson's, because I wish I had those memories and just about life. And I put a lot in the book, but I realized myself I had to call my aunt, who is my mother's sister, for a lot of I mean, my aunt is unfortunately the only person really left that can tell me a lot of the history of my mother, which is sad because everyone's either passed on or some people just don't, remember a lot, or she didn't tell people as much. But me and her were my mother were best friends, but you kind of think of things and forget them. And now when I wish I had them, I wish I had, technology wasn't like it is today. Everybody's got, podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was then. That's the one thing I would have told myself is please, start a podcast with my mother and make it fun and not about art and just about life. Because, I mean, I've had about 50 so far on my show. And I just think maybe my kids someday will have that to remember their father,
Yeah. Yeah,
That's,
100%. It's a beautiful legacy you're creating for them. So,
I'm
um,
hoping that they don't. I actually think to myself a lot, like, do I want, we have Together for Sharon. Do I want it to continue when I'm not around? And then I think again and say, no, I don't, because I want the disease to be over. So,
yeah.
worry about that then. But I hope we don't have to keep having all these, I'd love to still talk about my mother, but won't be like, 10 shows a day like I'm doing. And it's kind of tough. It is Parkinson's Awareness Month right now in April. So there's a lot going on, like live things, but at some points, even as a caregiver now, as an advocate, I'm still not following my own plan, which is, in my heart, I feel like if we could just reach one person every day and make them aware of Parkinson, then we've made a big change. So if I don't do the 10 shows, I feel like part of me is missing something. And that's a big downfall of my own self that I need to somehow figure out, but that's also for a different show.
Yeah. Okay, so reflecting on your present moment, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world tonight, who would it be?
Well, I mean, probably my wife, because she yells at me that we don't have enough time because of the kids, and this Parkinson stuff has taken over my life because it's a big part of it. Even though my mother's passed, and my mother would have been cool, but that's not possible. Maybe going back to the restaurant that's no longer there with my wife and my mother. And it's hard though, because when you're in the moment, you're just so happy and think you don't even know about the future. And now I do. It's not much. Again, we could have changed, but I would have loved to have that moment again. We were all just sitting at the table laughing. And sometimes me and my mother on Sundays would argue. I joke all the time about where to order food because we have a big family and everybody wants different food. And then we would have like almost wars over this nonsense. And now we don't have it, and I miss it. So the last thing is this: everyone out there, love your loved one, forget about nonsense and any fights and things. And, we don't know how much time, we'll have with one another. You have to value it, appreciate it, and love it because, unfortunately, I don't have that anymore.
Well, that's really good advice. So thank you. Or for that reminder, George, that's really helpful. And one goal you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years. So this is looking forward.
I used to ask this to people, but I stopped because there's only one goal, and that's to end Parkinson's disease. So I stopped asking it because it's like whoever doesn't say that my show's about Parkinson's. It's if they say something else, then it's kind of but that's literally the number one answer. So I stopped even asking. But for me, it's the same. I don't want to have to do all this. I love to just come on and talk about police work, law, criminal justice system, because my prior work was aiding African American mothers who lost their loved ones due to murder in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I really enjoy helping family members because a lot of time they're forgotten by the criminal justice system. And it's a little similar to the Parkinson's community because I still feel a lot of the Parkinson's community is really forgotten. I mean, I was honored to have Senator Rick Scott come on my show, but I've been trying to have Senator Marco Rubio and their staff. And I'm going to be honest, I'll be talking about this in the book. They just don't even know, I think, what Parkinson's is, and the staff, it didn't even get to him. They're saying they had more important stuff. So I got upset and said, are you seriously? My mother's life's important. I'm a constituent. I live in Florida, and so millions of people are being affected, losing their lives. So he has to really come around. But that's part of the problem in society is they just, I don't want it. I don't want someone to become aware and involved because now they're battling it or the family member has it. If we all had everyone involved now, we would end it, and then that would be it. So we still need a lot more awareness. We need more. We even need celebrities involved. I've been lucky to reach out to a few and got responses. I interviewed Muhammad Ali's daughter. I had Kenny G, a saxophone player, played a song and said a message on the website. Jack Osborne responded to me and wrote a video message for Ozzy because his father's struggling. And I met Jana Reno years ago who passed due to Parkinson's. So unfortunately, more and more people, even celebrities, are now showing up with Parkinson's, which is heartbreaking. But we need everyone's voice. My hero, again, Michael J. Fox, started the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I had the honor of meeting him a month or two ago, and it was like a moment I'll never forget in my life. But at the same time, it was exciting, incredible. It was also sad, and because he couldn't really stand too long. And just recently, he was on an award show, and he came out in a wheelchair, and he had young onset Parkinson's, which is younger, like you can get it at 30 or even younger. And he chose to fight back, which is just what I want to do, because he could have just went away and had a nice life quietly, but he didn't do that. He's raised $2 billion, not million. I said $2 billion. So,
Incredible.
and now they found something for the first time, breakthrough last year. It's called a biomarker, and I believe I don't know the science, but you can have a needle into the spine, and it might be able to diagnose if you have Parkinson's or not. And that's scary. So they want to move that in the next year or two to just a regular shot in a doctor's office. If they could do that, that'll change the world. Because if you could find early diagnosis, you could better treat it and try to deter and slow down the progression, and that'll change the world. But right now, we don't have that.
Wow, that's incredible. Incredible. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, George, for being on the podcast and sharing your story and sharing Sharon's story as well. I mean, it was just really, really beautiful for you to come on and share this with the listeners. And I hope that we're bringing a little bit more awareness on Parkinson's, and hopefully we're getting closer to that cure. And if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
So if you go to www.TogetherForSharon, it's spelled out, FORSHARON.com. It's just me. I'm on every social media. It's pretty cool though. If you go on our website and scroll down a little, you can purchase the book, but you can also see a little looking like a tree, like a Christmas tree. If you click that button, it'll show you all my social media, and you can just add me and I'll add you back. And, it's all growing and growing. And it's just, I just want people to know they're never alone. And sometimes I still feel alone, but then when I see all the incredible people sharing my book now and supporting us, it means the world. So, I'm grateful for your time and friendship, and I consider you family too, because this is not something that's, fun to talk about some days. It's tough topics, but I think the more we are aware and the more we talk about it, we might be able to find solutions, which is hopefully someday a cure.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much, George. I'm sending you guys lots of love. And yes, and thank you again for being on here.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Envisionaire podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast so that you stay up to date on all of our new episodes.